Welcome, everyone. So good to be with all of you. In a strange moment, earlier there were 3 people named Jess here. And I was like, oh, we're multiplying. And then it really occurred to me, wow, okay, that's a wonderful moment of no separation. Yeah, thank you all for doing this today with us. This talk is about spiritual friendship. And I wanted to start with, I guess we'll talk a little bit about the format.
Sure.
I'll talk for a few minutes. Nate has no idea what I've prepared. And then he'll respond. And I'm very nervous about this. I told him I signed up for debate in high school and I immediately dropped it. And then he'll speak for a bit and then I'll respond and then we'll open it up to all of you. Okay, so for maybe the past few months, I've been thinking about offering a Dharma talk called The Restoration of Joy. And I've written about 4 or 5 talks on this, and when Nate asked if we wanted to maybe do like some series of talks or do a Dharma talk together, I was like, yeah, Restoration of Joy, got it. But I was sitting with that, and that is my practice daily right now, which is a wonderful practice, and I'm happy to offer these talks if anyone ever wants that. But one morning, maybe this week or last week, I'm still sitting and it just doesn't, it's like not clicking somehow, like, nope, that's not it. That's my personal practice right now, but it's not necessarily what I need to bring to the Sangha. And so during Zazen, this thought occurs to me, well, what about spiritual friendship? And so I get up during the break, I go to the library, and this book is like popping off the shelf at me. Buddhism and Friendship. I don't know if y'all can see it online.
2 copies.
2 copies. So I go, okay, maybe. And then there's a little tab, and I open to the tab, and it says, appropriate topic for spiritual talk. In Peg's writing. And I'm like, well, that's what we're doing then. So I reach out to Nate, and he goes, yeah, fine. Really nonplussed by it. And I have really enjoyed studying this book and delving into this topic. So I'm going to be using and referencing a few things out of here. But just to begin with the story of the Buddha and Ananda, which some of you may know. So Ananda was the Buddha's cousin and also deeply practicing partner for 25 years as the Buddha continued. And apparently one day Ananda just got this stroke of insight and came to the Buddha and said, I think I've got it. I think spiritual friendship is half the practice. It's half the practice. It's truly half. Meaning, everything that we do on our own is the other half. Four Noble Truths and such. And the Buddha says, I'm sorry, no. It's the whole of the practice. So why did the Buddha say that? And what does that even mean? Spiritual friendship is the whole, not half, of the spiritual life. We talk about the Sanskrit or the Pali for spiritual friendship as Kalyana Mitra. And so the word Mitra we know is friendship. That one's pretty easily translatable. Kalyana, though, apparently is a little more difficult to translate, as Sanskrit has many, many meanings. So I'd like to offer this to you guys, a little bit of the reading from here about Kalyana, because it's just beautiful. So sometimes it's translated as beautiful, charming, auspicious, helpful, morally good. But the underlying sense fuses the ideas of goodness and beauty, implying that what is good is beautiful. Occasionally, in the scriptures, Kalyana literally means beautiful, as in nice looking, but it usually refers to spiritual beauty that pleases the heart and mind rather than the senses. According to a well-known formula that reoccurs in several places, the Dharma itself is Kalyana in its beginning, Kalyana in its middle, and Kalyana in its end. Good and beautiful through and through, one might say. A friendship that is Kalyana is therefore lovely, not just because it's pleasant or warm, but because it is based on a shared orientation to what is ultimately beautiful, the Dharma. So I think that that's an important distinction, and it says here the main distinction that distinguishes this kind of friendship from others is its roots are shared in spiritual aspirations and experiences. So the Buddha continued this teaching. He didn't only tell it once to Ananda. There are several stories where he speaks about spiritual friendship as the whole of practice. He is trying to explain why spiritual friendship is the whole of spiritual life. And he tells Ananda, when a bhikkhu, a monk, has a good friend, a good companion, a good comrade, it is to be expected that he will develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path. And when I read that, I went, oh, okay, so that's it. So the spiritual friendship itself helps you on the Eightfold Path. Shariputra also talked to the Buddha about this. So Shariputra comes and he says, I have really decided that spiritual friendship is the whole of spiritual life. I think he already heard. But the Buddha approved his words and said, good, Shariputra. And he went on to explain the matter in the same way they explained it to Ananda. Shariputra, however, penetrating more deeply than Ananda had, reached the same insight as the Buddha himself. He had seen that while Kalyana Mitra and individual effort both contribute to the spiritual life, they don't do so by supplying two separate portions of that life. So there's no way to separate it, right? Right, Jess?
Sorry, I'm an honor.
No separation. It's kind of like how parents can't tell, like you probably can't tell what Parker got from you and what Parker got from Jess. Maybe in some things.
The good stuff's from mom.
It's the same, right? We can't separate our own practice from our practice with each other. It's just not possible, actually. There's a third occasion, and this is, I'm only going to talk about 3, there may be more that Nate brings up, but about Meghiya. Is that how you say that word? Meghiya? He was a, okay, that's how we're going to say it today. So Meghiya is a monk. He and the Buddha are practicing in a very rural place. It's just the two of them, they're away. And he sees this beautiful mango grove. And he's absolutely smitten, and he's like, I'm gonna go practice in the mango grove. And the Buddha says, well, actually the role of the attendant is to stay, so why don't you wait until another monk comes? And Meghiya says, but you're the Buddha. I mean, what else do you need? You've already achieved enlightenment. I've got so far to go. Let me go to the mango grove. Again, I really would love an attendant. And another monk is on the way. Well, Meghiya and the Buddha both know this weird thing if you ask something 3 times in Buddhism. So he asks the 3rd time, and the Buddha says, well, Meghiya, if you speak of striving, what can I say? Do as you think best. So of course he goes, he takes his leave and he spends the afternoon in the mango grove. And I'm just picturing the smell of that. That just would be amazing. And I would want to sit there too. However, it doesn't work out as he had hoped. He is filled with the lowliest of thoughts, with striving, with anger, with malicious fantasies. His whole mind is just taken over the entire time. And he becomes very critical of himself and very upset. And he says, "Here, what am I doing? I've gone forth from this worldly life, inspired by faith. I've become a monk. Yet here I am overwhelmed by unwholesome mental states." So luckily he has a friend. He goes back to the Buddha and he admits what has happened. And the Buddha starts by explaining that when a disciple has not yet reached the spiritual maturity required for liberation of the heart, 5 things are necessary. And the first one he says is Kalyana Mitra. I'll list the other 5. We're not going to go into that, but just in case your mind is curious, because I'm like, "Ooh, yeah, let me know, please." The second thing is that leads to liberation of the heart is that the disciple should be virtuous, living in accordance with the ethical precepts. Thirdly, he needs or she needs to have access, easy access to talk that conduces to the spiritual life in all of its aspects. Fourthly, his or her energy should constantly be roused for the spiritual life. In other words, they need inspiration and encouragement. And finally, she must develop wisdom. And so all of them are interwoven with the first. It's not like spiritual friendship and then these other things. They're all influenced and practiced within the container of spiritual friendship. So as not to just leave Meggia in this place where he's like a dejected monk, where he was still working is that he needed to learn the importance of friendship. He has been in the company of the Buddha, but has not fully benefited from it because he has not yet learned how to be a friend. And Kim and I have had lots of discussions about that this week, about the importance of spiritual friendship and how to be in Sangha for one another. So I'll finish with this. Close friendship with good people is the most effective way to make one's own conscience more delicate. In the same way that your health tends to improve if you move to where the air is cleaner. By contact with kind, generous, honest friends, we come to understand and to feel what goodness really is. The essence of this lesson is that spiritual friendship is a kind of womb or matrix from which all aspects of the spiritual life, even wisdom, emerge. It is not something we leave behind after our spiritual apprenticeship. The qualities, attitudes, habits, and skills that we need to attain enlightenment will appear gradually and progressively within the medium of Kalyana Mitra, like crystals forming in solution.
Oh, there's so much I want to say to that. Thank you. I think the first piece about this is not a solo practice. I was thinking back to Peg's history, where she talked about sitting on her own for 20 some odd years before she found Joko. And she said her real practice, or that moment of what shifted when she started practicing in community, was the shift. And so being in connection then sort of dispels the myth of separation. I love the idea of the goodness and beauty, that's how that spirit, what we call spiritual, is translated, and thinking about how it's speaking to the heart mind. I didn't find that when I was prepping, so thank you for sharing that. And then I was thinking again of this last piece that you ended of it makes things more delicate, and thinking then again about Flint's posture of softening barriers to love. Right? And he said that is kind of his aspiration, and perhaps it's friendship that softens us, so it makes us more receptive and open. And I say that as I'm looking around at spiritual friends in the room, feeling the many times where I felt softened and receptive because of that, and made more delicate and open. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I guess I'm up.
Yeah.
Okay. So we were started in the exact same place in an interesting way. So I found the same thing in the polycanon, so I'm gonna skip that part because you already got it. Thanks. And this is what happens when you don't know what the other person's gonna say. And so I started from a kind of a place of inquiry of, first of all, what is spiritual friendship? And then how do we distinguish it from conventional friendship? But there was one piece that I found. I was sifting through some things because, like you discovering the book that was calling to you, I was asking Peg for something completely unrelated. And she sent me I was asking about how she was writing about encounter. And then I was reading in chapter 11 of her book. And lo and behold, it's all about spiritual friendship. So I'm like, yeah, I guess that's the talk. So it's been chosen for us. There's one piece in the Polycanon that talks about Ananda's encounter. And then there's another occasion where a young monk, Siglaka, saying, yeah, the Buddha says this, young man, there are 4 kinds of kind-hearted friends. The friend who is helpful, the friend who shares one's happiness and suffering, the friend who points out what is good, and the friend who is sympathetic. I'd never encountered that before. And so I was thinking about how these friendships are not bound by superficial ties. They're not simply an overlap of common interests that's informing them or shaping them. There's some sort of depth here. And so I started to think through what are some of those markers of spiritual friendship. And I was reading in some of Bhikkhu Bodhi's work and a couple of other places. And here's my sort of distillation. It is not directly from him or from somebody else. I think there are 4 kind of key markers that make a spiritual friendship a little different or transcendent. And the first one is this aspiration, and I heard you say that. At its core, spiritual friendship is about a partnership and awakening. It's a bond that's grounded in something more than the superficial. And so we're not looking for entertainment. We're looking for substantive connection and saying, what are we moving towards? And that grounding in a common aspiration makes it quite different. So it means that there's a mutual dedication to meeting what's arising and meeting it in a particular way. I don't know, maybe you've had friendships that we meet what's arising by bitching about it, complaining about it, co-signing it. This is something different. You share resolve to encounter all the myriad Dharma gates that are arising perpetually before us and to stepping through them in friendship. That's a kind of different way of relating to friendship. And it's not passive, it's an active engagement where we don't just encourage each other, not with platitudes, but with a kind of honesty and robust care that marks it as a little bit different. The second feature that came up for me was this idea of mirroring, that our spiritual friends mirror for us who we are and what the world is. So unlike the pleasantries and platitudes that often cushion conventional relationships, spiritual friendships demands a willingness to engage honestly, even when the truth stings. When I was a teacher teaching in Newark, in New Jersey, my kids, high school kids, would say, you need someone who will tell you about yourself. I love that line. It's like somebody who will speak truthfully to you, even if it makes you bristle. And I think that's something that is really present in spiritual friendship. They're not just mirroring your light, but they're also showing back some of your shadowy parts so that you're forced to engage a bit. And doing so with compassion and love, but not hiding away from those difficulties. So they point out those sharp edges, not to criticize you, but to help you soften those edges and meet them differently. I think the third piece that came up is this quality of attunement that's present in spiritual friendship. So it's not just about showing up and waiting for your chance to talk, or going out and playing, going and seeing the movie that you know you both are going to like, or whatever other sort of loose thing ties you together. It's about that art of really truly being there in a deep and abiding way, and attuning to the needs and offerings of the other person. So I think of that in that way. Spiritual friendship is kind of both an invitation and a practice in and of itself. So it's an invitation to encounter fully the other, to see how you mirror one another, and that in and of itself is an embodiment of our practice. And I had three things of what when I was thinking about this, what differentiates this from typical friendship? And I had to make up a word to describe the first one. So my word is preferencelessness. You don't have to love or enjoy or even really like a person who's sitting across from you. They can still be a magnificent spiritual friend. Interesting to think about, right? We think of what's the common bonds that weave us together in relationship. We often think about it as some sort of affinity. That's not necessarily required in spiritual friendship. In fact, some of the best spiritual friends I've had were ones that I'm like, we don't have this great rapport or anything, but good God, you mirror for me, you show up for me, and I hope I can do the same for you. And what's interesting when I think about those friendships is if you can bring some curiosity to that initial sort of sense of disconnect starts to collapse in and of itself. But regardless, preference is not required, preferencelessness. The second I borrowed from Peg, and that's about what's different is this commitment to encountering, just meeting each other fully. So in these relationships, dialogue is never idle. It is intentional, purposeful, and alive with possibility. Such friendships are grounded in the mutual willingness to ask questions that matter, to sit with the discomfort of the unknown, and to challenge the edges of what we believe to be true. That's what I think of when I think of encountering. And then the last one I had was, and this feels like a challenge to me, so maybe that's why I had to think about it, is equipoise. Maybe you've heard, this is Peg's translation and Musong's translation of equanimity. So it's not about steady evenness in all situations. It's more like dancing on a high wire and responding to it and staying on the wire. So sometimes that requires a little more force. Sometimes that requires really subtle movement. But I think the idea of creating equipoise in relationship is interesting. To say, can we meet what's arising together and create a sort of spaciousness that allows us to endure and not be shaken by all the things that life will throw at us. So in this way, you're moving then kind of beyond transaction and into true and proper connection, because you're not just trying to get something out of it. You're not just waiting for the happy times and going on vacations together. Is you're meeting whatever's arising and cultivating a space that says, in this space, in this container, we can meet anything together. And that seems to be a marker as well. So that's what I got.
I feel so lucky to be your friend, because that's something that you embody and that I experience with you. The mirroring aspect, the willingness to enter through all the various gates, and that genuine, commitment to, we can meet this. So thank you. So I wanted to finish with just a little experience. What time is it?
You got time?
We got time? Okay. Okay, so this will be really easy. Just turn to the person next to you. And you might need to rearrange a little bit in order to do so. If you're online, just pin a person, any person. And don't worry, it might not be that that person pins you back, and it'll still work. You won't know, and that's okay. Don't think too much about it. So just staying with your own experience initially. And just notice whatever's here, whatever's arising. Your eyes are closed, you're currently experiencing whatever's on the inside. And just take a few deep breaths here. And then as you're ready, and this will be in your own time, just open and close your eyes at your own pace. And when you're ready to open your eyes, take in that person or people, and then return to closed eyes. When you open your eyes, just notice what happens for you all by itself. And then as you close your eyes, notice that. Just this little practice of opening and closing your eyes. And staying with the internal experience as it shifts outwardly and inwardly. The next time you open your eyes, see the person as someone who has achieved something in their lifetime. Take that with you as you return to your own awareness internally. Now, the next time you open your eyes, see that person as their 5-year-old self. Notice anything that's arising for you. And the next time you're ready to open your eyes, see the person or people across from you as your mirror. Okay, do whatever you'd like to do to complete. Maybe it's a bow or a hand to your heart. And come on back to the main Zoom room. So this is a rich topic, and how lucky we are. I'd like to open it up to any of the spiritual friends here today. Kim?
I'm always amazed when we do this kind of exercise, how much more powerful it is than when we're talking to each other. And, sometimes I'm suspicious that our talk is a means to separate as opposed to be together.
Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah, this talk seemed like a great way to bring up the topic of spiritual friendship. What else can a Sangha do to promote spiritual friendships?
That's a wonderful question. Firstly, would you please tell me your name?
Sure, I'm Tom.
Tom, okay.
Yeah.
Jessica. Yeah, I think it's just that. It's be curious about one another, get to know one another, reach out. I think we can let it be that simple. Thank you.
I was thinking, just in response to that, I was thinking the first times I came to Tapalamada, you're sitting in silence. You're not connecting in the conventional ways, and you feel something when you're in close quarters with people. So that simple ask of like, hey, how are you? Would you like to go get coffee sometime? Something like that. Those little bridges where it made me really feel connected.
I really appreciate what both of you guys said. Nate, the part about the importance of honesty and truthfulness and having, I guess, enough confidence and trust to not need to be liked, to be able to say what needs to be said as a differentiating path. I really appreciate that. It seems to me that one-on-one friendships, maybe even therapeutic relationships work because well, maybe it might be because it's just fewer, it's just more direct. There's a part of me that worries or wants to figure out, like, as the group turns from one-on-one to, say, a larger community, we know as social animals, we like to conform. And the larger the group, as we know, politically, you start taking on the beliefs of others because it's too hard to, you don't want to risk the social costs of what you could do one-on-one. And so in that way, in many ways, the community can be a hindrance because of our social nature. So I wonder how this principle of spiritual friendship could be translated to a larger community and not be a hindrance. It seems different in some way. Different things are required, maybe.
I can just start by saying that that is the one thing that I really have grown to trust and appreciate about you, and one of the reasons why you're one of my closest spiritual friends is that you are willing to bring this up and to look at this and to speak about it. And it takes a very courageous person to say things that seem contrary or that may not even be your actual belief, but that you're standing in a position of wanting to open the dialogue. So really, thank you for being that person in our Sangha. I don't think you're the only person, but certainly you have an eye on this idea of conformity, and it has helped me enter through Dharma gates that I didn't expect, and come to edges that I didn't want to meet. So thank you.
I've got three things popping around in my head in response. I'll say them so I don't forget. Conformity, complexity, and shared practice. So on conformity, is all conformity bad? Right. So I think there's a question of just being careful about, sometimes we conform to particular structures or ways of interacting because they make other things available and possible. So if you have a nonconformist tendencies, I put myself in that same bucket. I tend to just push back against anything just to push. So that's one thing. The second thing that was arising for me is, you're right, and you're now in a web of relationships, and the complexity that emerges there, it's different if it's one-on-one. As soon as we have a conversation that includes another, you've got multiple points of overlap, which to me then, you just honoring and understanding that complexity then seems to invite some shared practices. Like if we don't have containers or ways of dialoguing intelligently, aligned with shared, with set norms or agreements, then it gets to be very difficult, because certain voices will shut down others and mandate conformity. So I think shared practices that become more explicit will be important inside of a community. Conformity, complexity, I think just the complexity piece is recognizing its complexity, and then shared practice as like, how do we cultivate shared practices that allow us to dialogue? And that's my inquiry right now in response to your question. What are those forms and structures that we might use that actually can contain difference and conflict?
Yeah, and we're very lucky to have practices like the right use of power, and spiral dynamics, and things that our teachers have taught us, system thinking, that helps us come forward to these types of questions as well, and hopefully practice with them in the best ways that we can. Jess?
I can say just a little bit about my own personal experience with that, because it really for me in the past, and
I'm sorry, but we can't hear, and we'd like to know who's speaking, please. Thank you.
you probably don't know me. I'll try to speak up. This has risen for me in communities in the past, and I think my belief around it is extremely important to be able to voice controversial views and have a space out in the open, and not a space that only certain individuals discuss things that's not brought to the community to be able to use. And so actually, differences and movement, and when they're not brought up, where it's allowed to talk about them, that's where things get weird. So they need to be hard to be.
Appreciate you saying that. As you're speaking, I was reflecting on, for instance, went to San Francisco Zen Center for a while. And one of the things that you said most appreciated about being there was, you're a Dharma talk, you're on a topic. And then the following day or shortly thereafter, you hear another Dharma talk on the exact same topic that completely disagreed with the former view, and it was all welcome. Mm-hmm. There was an invitation to hold difference just by the feature of that shared practice. So something like that to me feels like that's an acknowledgement of the community that difference is okay and in fact welcome.
Okay, am I unmuted? Yeah, I think I am. I have a couple of comments, and I don't want it to feel like it's me, nitpicky kind of stuff, but I want to acknowledge that there are a lot of us sort of in the diaspora, and we don't have the benefit, and I sometimes feel like it's a luxury of having a physical Sangha. And while I belong to a Sangha technically here in the Twin Cities, we meet maybe once a month in person in someone's home. So having that eye contact that we just experienced, which is so powerful, becomes, we don't have that very often at all. And in order to have spiritual friendship, it takes a lot of, well, it takes energy, and it takes scheduling and texting people and can you get together, and it's a challenge. It's not insurmountable, but it's different. It's different, and the reason that I bring it up is that I'm trying to think of a way to make it easier and more natural to do that without, just having a calendar that's full all the time with phone calls. Anyway, and that's comment number one. And the second thing I have a question about is there are some people who I have known and been close to for 45 years. And we've gotten of different faiths or no faith. And we have gotten beyond the trivial parts of practice or belief, or the junk conversation, the yada yada about the weather. Is it possible to cultivate a spiritual friendship with someone who isn't in touch with the Dharma, or doesn't know about it? And maybe we talk about it, maybe they've noticed things about me and my practice that they're curious about, and vice versa. What do our spiritual friends need to be Zen? I guess is the question. That's pretty basic, but what are your thoughts about that?
My first thought was everyone's in touch with the Dharma, even if they don't know it. And no, do your spiritual friendships need to be, you need only to have Zen? But my most rich and meaningful spiritual friendships are with folks of other practices. And it's incredibly nourishing in your practice to have people who practice alongside you.
Thank you.
And Marla, I hope I didn't give any indication that this is easy.
Yeah.
Right, John Eric? I mean, I think that I think this practice with each other is the hardest thing, And so, thank you for bringing that in. I can always rely on your bright, whole self to show these areas that are still covered.
It's such a lovely question, Marla. I just remembered as you asked it, one of my a romantic relationship I was in a decade ago. I remember pinpointing the moment I thought it was going to end. And it was when I realized that at that point I was writing my dissertation on Buddhist philosophy, so everything was just Zen and Buddhism nonstop. And never at any point did she ask me, would you tell me a little bit about this thing that you're interested in? And it was not that I wanted her to become Zen or Buddhist Zen. She didn't need to be, but the complete lack of what are you about is like, it's a kind of
Mm-hmm.
that kind of, you don't need to be Zen, you just need to show basic interest in the other person.
And I think that Nate spoke really clearly to that about attunement. Yeah, thank you for that.
Hello. Thank you for this, both of you. So much has come up for me. I actually, in response to Marla, I actually had a revelation during this conversation we're having that I have I have personal history with Christianity, and I often feel like triggered by faith, Christ, church, religion, dogma. But most of my friends here are Christian and go to church, but they go to a very liberal church called the Neighborhood. And it just dawned on me that instead of feeling alienated because of that, I can actually feel fortunate that I'm friends with people who also deeply care and live from the heart and are intentionally seeking to do so. And when I first came to Appamada almost 3 years ago, it was because Q posted on Facebook, Appamada is great, check it out. And I thought, well, I could try a meditation, probably couldn't hurt. And but I'm only sitting for 15 minutes because that's plenty. And but then there was this after, Zazen conversation, and I was just stunned by it. I mean, it just hit me like a tsunami. I mean, I just couldn't quite figure out what it was, but I had to come back. The quality of the communication and the presence, and the support and the vulnerability, the authenticity. And then I went through a big struggle with belonging. Do I belong? I probably don't belong. I'm probably not a good Zen person, And Kim really reached out to me and kept inviting me to come and, read Ox stories with him and have other conversations. And I was really puzzled by this too. I thought, what, he's so busy, and he's creating time for someone who doesn't know it all. And then whenever I expressed that about belonging, Maria would say, just stay. And that was simple enough for me to hang on to. She says, just stay. So maybe I'll try that one more time. And I'm co-facilitating Women in Zen now. And in a recent group, someone said to me, who had come for the first time, oh, I kind of thought we weren't supposed to be triggered by stuff and have negative reactions, but it turns out we can have anything come up. And I feel like, speaking to you, Christoph, and to all of us, there's an intentionality in this community that I experience in terms of, should you meet the Buddha in the road, kill him, or that the welcoming of two apparently different experiences or beliefs or perceptions at the same time, or the ways in which people are heard without being judged, whether people agree or not. I just wanted to name that.
How are we doing on time? Okay. I'd like to end with a quote from John O'Donohue. Very simple. He says, "To be fully understood is to be fully free." And I think that's our vow, right? So let's just try to understand each other.